Per usual, thank you guys who are here on time, and yet we all know, and maybe we're that person sometimes, that real estate agents aren't known for being on time. So I will wait at least a couple minutes here to let everybody filter in. I guess while we wait, though, anybody have any pressing questions or maybe observations from the market that you guys either want to discuss or just share?
I think it's just funny that since all these changes with the lawsuit and the NAR settlement, I'm getting so many calls from lead companies wanting to give me seller leads now. No one's wanting to give us buyer leads because it's just different now.
Interesting. What's their selling just because they think that no one wants buyer leads, or is there some special thing that they're doing?
That's my take on it, is that they're just trying to get ahead of what they forecast is going to be a headache for agents, and they're now trying to make it sound, I mean, I get probably three a week now when normally I would get pursued for buyer leads, just companies wanting to sell you buyer leads. And it's just all listings now. And I'm like, no, no, no. But I just find it, I don't know, like a weird coincidence or something to do with the way they're trying to perceive our headaches now. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure it's not a coincidence. Now that you say that, I've noticed that a little bit too. I really don't ever talk to any of them, but their messaging has been more so around seller leads lately. I would say seller, yeah, I don't know. I would just be careful with spending money on seller leads. My experience has been not so great unless they're like ready to go referrals. But even those, it's just conversion is difficult with, or more difficult with sellers, unfortunately. And I think they're also more likely to already have a connection with somebody. And so, and they're just poking around trying to get a home value or something like that. So, all right, let's see. Let me look for some of my regulars here and see. We have some new people on. So that's exciting. So give me like one more minute and then I'll go ahead and get started. But yeah, that's an interesting observation. I think the whole thing is interesting. It's, yeah, it's just very interesting. Since we're mixed brokerages here, we probably shouldn't talk about my most interesting observation, but sometime when we're consultants only and we can talk without being accused of colluding, I'll share my observation. But anyways, it's just haven't seen much of a change in terms of anything other than just the way that we do things. So, but we'll see. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. I guess for those of you that came in a little bit later here, does anybody have any specific things that you wanted to discuss? I have, a lot of the same stuff that I usually do. I threw in a few, what I think are interesting, tweaks, but I think, some light predictions and then also just some observations and things to keep an eye on. I think the next couple months could be very, very interesting in the real estate market. And so I'm excited to talk about it. But does anybody else have any really quick things that they want to make sure we talk about today? No? Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and get started. And then, as always, if you guys want to have questions or want to bring up anything in particular, please don't hesitate to reach out and unmute and say whatever. So, all right. All right, so hopefully everybody's here for the September market update, which focuses mostly on the October or the August data, but obviously, again, happy to talk and love to chat about what's happening right now in the market. So I think most of you know who I am, but like I said, I do see a few new faces on. So just explain really quickly. I've been in real estate since 2004. Um, I have a team. I'm also a real estate investor. I also represent a lot of investors. And I would say, I mean, not that I wasn't interested in numbers before, but I would say that's definitely something that pushed my need to understand the market at a deeper level is working with investors, because I can tell you, if you can speak the market language, working with investors becomes almost easy. Um, just because so few agents can actually do it. And that's really what most investors are looking for. I'm also a real estate coach with the I Love Coaching Company. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook, so you can follow me there as well. I'm been trying to do a better job posting again after moving a couple months ago, kind of derailed me, and I have intentions of being even better. So should be posting some good stuff, but feel free to follow me. So, all right, what are we going to jump into today? So generally the same kind of format that we use normally. So we'll first, for those of you that may be outside of Central Ohio, we'll talk about the national trends, which most areas tend to follow general trends. But then, as we all know, local trends can vary, and I think that's true for sure in Central Ohio. I'm going to also jump into, and unfortunately, it's all national when it comes to the economy, just because we don't have enough local data to really talk intelligently about that. But we'll talk about interest rates, employment, inflation, different lending trends, and then what all those mean, how they relate to each other, and what that means for the selling market. And then in Central Ohio, we'll kind of go over the inventory and selling trends, as well as the showing trends, and then a quick blurb as well about rentals, which was interesting and different from my experience, but the numbers are what the numbers are. So I'll jump into that for a couple minutes at the end as well. So, and like I said, feel free to bring up any questions that you guys might have also. All right, active listing count nationally was up by 35.8% compared to August of last year, which is definitely significant. However, what I do want to point out is this graph is actually showing us going all the way back to 2017. And what you can see here is that although we're above kind of the pandemic or post-pandemic era in terms of total inventory, nationally, we're still about 20 to 30% below pre-pandemic averages, which, a million or more active listings was very common back in the late 20 teens. Is that how you say it? And so we would definitely be looking to get back to there before we would really consider ourselves in more of a balanced market. Some markets across the country have reached, and a few have actually exceeded pre-pandemic inventory levels. I do have a theory on that, which I won't go into unless you guys are very interested. So if you are, please speak or forever hold your peace. But either way, what we see is that definitely we're inching closer to that million active listing mark, but we're certainly not there, and we're definitely not at pre-pandemic levels. So, keep these percentage increases in perspective always. It's the easiest way to cause drama when it comes to stats, is looking at year over year percentage changes, because when you're going from a really low number or a really high number that's not average, these numbers can look way more exceptional than they actually are. So, all right. So newly listed homes, I would say this is probably the more important stat. And the reason is, if you guys have ever heard of leading indicator versus lagging indicator, I think active properties are almost a lagging indicator, but newly listed homes are definitely a leading indicator. So this is telling us You know, our new, you know, there are more properties listing now than there were when the market was stronger? And the answer is unfortunately no. And so even though we have lower buyer demand in the market, because we have fewer sellers than ever before listing. Actually, if you look at this, this is the fewest number of sellers that we've had in August, going all the way back to 2017, that have entered the market in August. So that's telling for, and really good foreshadowing for what's probably to come, as we go into the fall, uh, compared to, you know, if we continue on what would be considered a normal trend line. Pending listings are kind of right in the middle. I always find the pending numbers to be a little bit confusing, and really I don't put a ton of value in them. I'm looking more at the trend line of the pendings. And it looks like in general, we're kind of trending in line with most years. The exception is 2020, but that was because of the pandemic shutdown. We saw kind of our spring market get destroyed, and then we saw a busier fall than normal. But you can see even in 2021 and 2022, basically the number of pendings drops pretty substantially, as we go into the fall season. I would say if we look at like the 2019 trend line and also the 2018 and 2017 trend line, you can see how the slope is a little bit less than 2022 and 2023. And the reason for that was the drop in rates during those years, were significant, or I'm sorry, the increase in rates during the fall was significant, which led to fewer sales, or a faster drop in the number of pendings than even what we normally see in the fall. Days on market is ticking up, which again, this is probably the best representation of the fact that we have lower buyer demand. So again, if we go back to when we talked about the new listings being lower, than ever before, but yet we're still seeing homes sit on the market on average longer than they did last year, that's an indication that we are, you know, we're the only reason why we have more listings on the market right now is not because we're listing more properties. It's just because there are fewer buyers out there. And so that's what this number is telling us. Our median list price is a hair lower than both 2022 and 2023. Again, this can be a leading indicator. 1.3% on the list price isn't a huge concern. And the reason is because I would say the last couple years, especially in the fall, we've seen a lot of sellers, not a lot, but enough of them be a little bit unrealistic with price. And when we get into the local numbers, you'll see this plainly because we have the active price versus the sold price all on one chart. And basically, sellers have been a little bit aggressive with listing high. And I think as homes sit on the market longer, especially in some markets where the inventory has increased a lot, like I mentioned, there are some of the strongest markets in the nation, like Austin and Florida, that have seen inventory really spike. Those sellers have been forced to be more realistic with their initial list price. And so the gap between the list price and the sales price is shrinking. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the sales price is dropping, which again, I have that data locally. Unfortunately, realtor.com and many other sources don't really talk much about the sold price, which I've always found interesting. But I get the idea behind it, but I don't necessarily 100% agree because of times like this where I think we're seeing that gap shrink. And with no sold data, it's very difficult to see that. So again, we'll see. This is another one that, I guess for lack of a better term, gives me hope, but also goes in line with what I was just talking about on the last slide, that actually the trend line for price reductions is coming down. And I think that's also an indicate. Well, I think there's two indications. Number one, we're also seeing more properties nationally that are drawn than we have over the last couple years. And then I also think this is another thing showing that sellers just are not willing to sell at any cost. Most sellers, many sellers do not have to move. And that's what we're seeing here by seeing this percentage of price reductions going down. Is that sellers just aren't feeling forced to reduce the price in order to sell. And many are willing to sit on the market and even pull their house off the market and relist next year. I think if interest rates continue their downward trend, we could see prices or list sellers get a little bit more aggressive with their list price in order to make sure they sell because they find a place that they really want. But I think a lot of what we're seeing here in terms of seller, I'll call it seller stubbornness, is the fact that sellers just, they're selling their house and they're selling their rate. And so unless they have to move, they're just choosing not to do it. All right, regional comparisons. As those of you that have been on here over this last several months, I really, maybe even a year now, I've been looking at this, and I really like this just because I think it puts things into perspective. Obviously, as we move further and further away from 2019, this chart probably becomes a little less valuable. But in general, you can see here that pre-pandemic, we're still well below average in terms of active listing counts. And then obviously the new listing counts are way off as well. So this just is showing us that sellers just are not willing to give up those interest rates. And it'll be interesting to see if we can get back to a number that causes this to happen. What the number is that causes sellers to finally say, okay, I know I have a 3% interest rate. I'm really okay with 5.5, but I'm not okay with 6, or I'm really okay with 6, but I'm not okay with 6.5, or maybe it's 4.5 and we're going to be in this for the next 5 years. Or longer. I don't know. But it'll be interesting to see. But right now we're just still way, way, way short of pre-pandemic. And it's almost certainly due to the difference between interest rates today and interest rates pre-pandemic. One thing to keep an eye on is this box right here. And that is in August, we saw two regions, the Midwest and the West, with 0% appreciation year over year. Now, that's not surprising, given the fact that we've certainly not seen the appreciation this year as a whole. But one thing that could happen, I think, with rates reducing, and this is what we're going to be keeping our eye on, I think there's a chance that we could see prices kind of go up, especially because last year, remember, we were just going into the mid to upper 7 time period where we actually almost touched 8. I think we did touch 8% on average nationally. And I think it was late September, early October last year. And so what we saw is a huge drop in buyer demand. And so that cools off the increase. If you don't have multiple offers, obviously the average prices are going to go down. And so it'll be interesting to see with interest rates right now in a dropping environment, if we see more buyers entering the market and see some multiple offer situations, which actually keep prices more flat during the fall instead of dropping, which is normal. If we see that happen, we're going to see the year over year prices probably go back into the positive in all the markets. But if we were to see kind of interest rates stall here in the 6 to 6.5%, it doesn't seem like buyers have been in a huge hurry to jump back in. And if we don't see them continue to drop, it'll be interesting. We could end the year in most regions, maybe outside of the Northeast, at a depreciation year over year, which would not be a great headline, but it's something that's a reality. So, and again, this is looking at regions. I think when we look at places like Columbus, we probably will not see a depreciation. So And Jeff, I just now saw your message here really quickly on my theory with regards to active listings, and especially actually this chart shows it really well. This is looking at the actual number of listings available for sale. The problem is bonus points to those of you that know the most popular regions for people immigrating to during the pandemic. Um, it was the two regions that are closest to their pre-pandemic active listings. And so my point is, I don't know what the numbers are, and I'll probably at some point this winter when I have more time research it. But there were millions and millions of people that moved from the Northeast and Midwest to the South and West during the pandemic. And so when you look at just the number of active listings on the market, let's say in the South, there's, I don't know how many millions more people that live in the South now versus pre-pandemic, but there's definitely millions. So if you look at that as a percentage of the total population, I'm just curious if these numbers would be less drastically different. Um, because the migration patterns definitely favored the South and the West during the pandemic. So I wonder about how accurate we can look. Like when people talk about the fact that Austin, Texas has the same number of listings now as they did pre-pandemic, Austin, Texas probably has at least 500,000, if not more people living there than they did pre-pandemic. And how many homes got built since pre-pandemic. So if there's the same number of homes on the market, but there's way more people living there, then the impact of the number of homes on the market is going to be smaller. So anyways, that's my theory. And I feel like I would be shocked if it's a theory and it's not just reality. But anyways, if anybody wants to do a research project, I would love you for it. I just haven't had time. All right, interest rates. I would say, I mean, I've kept the title of this slide the same for the last 2 years, almost since I started this. I think the interest rates continue to be the news. What I did this time, though, I went back to April, not for any specific reason other than just kind of showing a little bit past the last time rates were below 6. But you can see that summer of 2022, for those of you that were in the market during that time, we really crossed over a 6% average once for a minute in July or June, but definitely kind of for good in September. And if you look at, and again, this is an average, so I know, like if you're doing VA or FHA, this is conventional. You definitely saw periods of time specifically in this time frame, like right around the end of 22, beginning of 23, where those rates were well into the fives, and actually they're in the fives now. But when we're talking about conventional, the average, and this is nationally, we really haven't seen rates at 6% since then, other than for a brief moment last spring. So if we were to dip into the fives for a national average, we're looking at more than 2 years ago since we've had those rates. And so it'll be really interesting to see if we put a 5 in front of an interest rate, what buyer activity looks like. I can tell you just based on my experience over this last weekend between offers that we wrote and also activity on my listings, it feels like there are more buyers out there. And again, we'll get into more data. I have some showing data and some other stuff to go through, but it'll be really interesting to see here over the next 2 or 3 weeks what this ends up looking like. Anyways, so if we go back 4 months, and I should have put that 4-month chart in here too, but if we go back 4 months, we actually are looking at interest rates that were a point and a quarter more than they are right now. And so one of the things you'll see down here last week in talking to my team, I kind of built out a little quick script. But if you have buyers that, I would say buyers or sellers that you've met with or talked to at any point over the last 2 years who decided not to do something, I would venture to guess that at least 50, maybe 75% of them decided not to do it because of interest rates. And if you're not talking to them about this chart, I think you're missing a huge opportunity. I mean, did you know that somebody that's getting a $600,000 loan is going to have a payment that's $500 less than they were going to in May of this year? Like, that's crazy. And that's something that I think that your people want to hear about. In a big way. And so I would advise you guys, and as always, feel free to email me at troy@marshhomegroup.com, and Allison can send you over these slides. But if you're not stealing this and using this and reaching out to past clients, you're leaving it up to them to visiting my website and having us reach out to them and make sure that they know about this. Because the best agents are finding ways to get extra transactions completed during this time, while everybody else worries about whether or not they're going to get paid, while we get paid on every deal and we add value. So I think you're missing a huge opportunity. If you take nothing away from this talk today, it should be this chart. And this should be printed off and set next to your computer. And every time you're having a conversation about why they need to do something now, this is it. I mean, this is it. And most, if not all, of consumers do not understand this column here. So I would highly recommend stealing this and duplicating it and doing whatever you have to do to get the ball rolling. And the cool thing is we have more houses for sale than at any time in the last, 2 years as well. I meant to delete this. I do not have updated numbers for this, so I'm going to skip over this. All right, so what's next with rates? So as we talked about before, there are two things that the Federal Reserve is looking for before they lower short-term rates. And I don't have a slide about this, but I've talked about it a million times. I want to remind all you guys, there's a difference between the Fed funds rate and mortgage rates, right? So everybody is expecting the Federal Reserve at their meeting on Wednesday to drop interest rates, which has been the talk of our industry. It's been, frankly, the talk of, if you're into or even slightly paying attention to politics, even the politicians are talking about it. But what we have to remember is that the Fed funds rate, which it's almost a guarantee that they're going to drop it. The question is by how much on Wednesday. That only applies to short-term interest rates. So things like car loans, credit cards, most likely your savings account rate will drop when the Fed lowers rates. And also commercial real estate, their interest rates go off of that. However, traditional mortgage rates like Fannie Freddie, 30-year conventional rates, FHA, VA, they are based more so off the 10-year treasury. And the 10-year treasury changes truly by the second. And so what that means to you is that, fortunately or unfortunately, everybody's been expecting the Fed to drop rates for a month now. So the reason why rates have come down over the last month is because everybody was expecting a rate cut this week. So unless the Fed drops by 0.5% instead of 0.25%, I would not expect mortgage rates to change much, if at all, this week due to the Fed lowering rates. Now, the trend has been slowly down, and there's a number of reasons for that, and those reasons are right listed here. And that is that employment the last 2 months has been significantly worse than expected. And again, for those of you that pay close attention, and I don't have a slide for it, but not only has employment the last 2 months been, in terms of the number of jobs added, been lower than expected, the Federal Reserve every year does an audit on the number of jobs that they say the economy has created. and they did an audit that came out. It was probably close to a month ago. It would have been like right after last uh my last Zoom from last month, and they adjusted downward the number of jobs created in the United States over the last 1 year by over 800,000. So that means this number that they give us every month was off a total of 800,000 jobs. And you can see, like, when you're only talking about 150, some months are 250 or 300. But right now, because job creation is slow, I mean, 800,000 is a lot of a huge adjustment. And so that, in combination with very low job creation over the last 2 months, it's definitely given the Fed a little bit of anxiety around maybe they held rates too long, a little, or too high, a little too long. They don't feel like they have. But the problem is, once the downward trend starts historically, it's very hard to stop it. And so we'll see. And this is something that we'll definitely be keeping an eye on. And if we continue to see slow job growth numbers, we could absolutely see the Fed start to drop rates in a faster way. One of the things that they will talk about on Wednesday at their meeting is not just how much they're dropping rates now, but they also have like a forecast that they take. So the Federal Reserve, and maybe I'm going too far into the weeds, but you guys are here, so I'll tell you. The Federal Reserve is made up of several members. And so there's a bunch of top economists throughout the country that get brought onto this Federal Reserve board. And so whenever they do these meetings, they do basically a prediction. They have a name for it, but um, and they do a prediction for what the next 2 or 3 years are going to look like in terms of interest rates. Now, obviously, these change all the time because it's based on the data today, but they're gonna give that new prediction on Wednesday, and so that could drive actually mortgage rates down if their prediction on reducing rates is more aggressive than we expect. They're rarely more aggressive. They like to kind of keep things status quo, but we'll see if they say like, hey, we're going to drop rates because we're really worried about the economy. We probably would see rates drop, but we'd probably also see the stock market sell off as well. And I don't think that the Fed wants that either. So I suspect that it'll be a very slow, steady drop in rates. And I think that's what most people that are way smarter than me are predicting as well. Inflation numbers were actually a little bit higher than what they would have liked to have seen for the month of August. And that could keep them. There was a lot of talk before the inflation numbers came out, but after the bad jobs report, that maybe they might be dropping rates by 0.5 point instead of 1/4 point. I think the inflation number might have given them cover to stick with the 1/4 point. But again, we'll see. There's a lot of things that go into their decision. So I know I just talked a lot about that, so feel free to unmute and ask questions. But I would definitely keep an eye on the news on Wednesday for what happens with this, because it'll be a driver for sure. Employment. This is just a quick graph. I thought it was cool. I found it while I was researching on job creation over the last, what would this be? Almost 3 years, definitely 2.5 years. So you can kind of see how the numbers have been slowly trending down. So yeah, so I thought that was cool. And then I always like this representation. It's just kind of interesting if you're not somebody that follows. I mean, I don't really follow the job market that closely, but just to look at the different types of industries that are hiring, and then also the industries that are losing jobs. Typically, obviously, manufacturing is kind of like the tip of the spear when it comes to the economy. And so if, what they're producing now is like what we're going to consume next spring type of thing. And so usually if overall they're nervous about the economy, you'll see manufacturing kind of go negative first. That's not a huge surprise. And it's also not something that can't be unchanged, but it's something to keep an eye on for sure. And then just this is year over year percentage change in average hourly earnings. The value of this definitely is really, when an employer has to pay an employee more money, they're going to pass that cost along to the end consumer at some point, because businesses are in business to make money. And so if they're paying their employees more, then they're making less unless they raise the price of their goods, which I think probably most of you guys understand. But you can see here in June in 2022, when we had really high inflation, the wage growth or the increase in year over year earnings was significant. And as inflation dropped, so does the year over year increase in the average earnings. And again, with a tighter job market, meaning fewer available jobs, you would expect to continue to see this kind of shrink, because fewer employers, like the person down the street isn't offering the employee, more money to come work there. They don't even have a job opening. And that's what was happening during the pandemic. Everybody was poaching everybody's employee, and so that was driving up wages. And then here's just a quick detail, I guess, on the path of inflation since 2021. You can see this was kind of, I guess we were still kind of in the pandemic, but this was like right after the pandemic, the bulk of the pandemic. And then you can see how inflation really spiked in beginning to middle of 2022. And then it fell off pretty quickly. But it's just been stubbornly in like the 3% range up until just here in the last couple months. And so that's why the Federal Reserve is finally considering interest rate reductions. So, and I've talked about this before, but this dotted line is all the goods minus food and energy. And the reason is because food and energy tend to be the most volatile. So like if gas prices go down, you'll see the consumer price index kind of fall really quickly. Conversely, if gas prices go up, you'll see that. And so this number is meant to kind of show you a more steady idea of what true pricing is looking like. And again, this is a year over year. So this is compared to 1 year ago. It's not compared to 2021. We wouldn't like to look at that number, but year over year, this is the increase. All right. So in addition to the interest rate conversation, which I think is probably the most important thing, like I said, you should take away, other ways to add value. If we do see an increase in buyer activity, I think builders, for the most part, have a good amount of inventory. And so I'd highly recommend. And then they also still have interest rate promotions. So I've definitely seen a lot of builders in the fours. I think I've seen some, and you guys might speak up, but I think I've seen some more even lower than that. So, uh, so yeah. Oh, Jeff, look at you. Jeff messaged me directly and said Austin's population is up 14.5% since 2019. So there you go. Not quite as much of a change as I expected, but still pretty significant. All right, lender offerings are another thing. So I'm definitely not going to get into the weeds on this, but just know that as interest rates drop, some lenders will be faster at dropping their mortgage rates than others. And so right now, whenever you have an actively changing, and they're usually really quick to increase when rates increase, but they're slow to decrease. And so just keep in mind that right now you could see the biggest difference between different lenders. And so right now might be one of the best times to work with a mortgage broker who has access to multiple lenders, because you could see a really significant difference in pricing. So again, if you have a buyer who is very payment sensitive or falls in love with a little bit more expensive house, make sure that, consider shopping that lender a little bit and seeing if you can find a lower interest rate. And also remember too, if they talked to their lender 30 days ago and you just haven't written an offer, their payment's going to be a lot lower now. And so as an agent, I know that we're not lenders, but how are you adding value to your client's experience? And honestly, you're doing a lot more work if you're not understanding how to calculate payment, or at least pushing them back to their lender to make sure that they know exactly what their payments are going to look like. And then there are also several grant programs out there if you're trying to sell a house in low to moderate income areas. There's also some that are based off of different demographical data, in terms of more opportunities depending on whether there's minority, percentage of minorities living in the area and different things like that. So absolutely keep your ears open for different lending programs, because honestly, understanding those might get you a sale or two or three here at the end of the year. And that's nice going into the slower time of the year. Oops. All right, so I'm going to stop for just a quick second. Anybody who's not local to Columbus have any questions about anything I've talked about? I see definitely a few of you that I know are not here in Columbus. Anything that you guys want to talk about, macro, national trends, before we jump into Central Ohio? Going once, going twice? No? All right, cool. Thanks, Shannon. I saw you on there. I almost called you out. It's good to see you. All right, so Columbus, again, Columbus a little bit better than the national average, but as you saw, the Midwest in general is. Looking at August only, though, new listings were down 1%, which is definitely not a trend that we want to see. And then solds were down 6.6%. So again, another reason why we're seeing inventory increase, because what this tells me is we have 6.6% fewer buyers in the market than we did a year ago, but we only have 1% fewer sellers. So when we have more sellers entering the market than buyers, you're going to see an increase in inventory. So as you can see, inventory is up 39.7%, which results in, what is that? Almost 1,200 available homes or condos compared to the same time last year. So again, I would say overall a good trend. We've been too tight on inventory, but definitely keep an eye on those solds, because obviously that also means there's 6.6% fewer commission checks. I'm assuming most, if not all of you, are real estate agents, so keeping that in mind. New construction's definitely seen a slowdown. Again, just like manufacturing, new construction companies are our manufacturers, if you want to look at it that way in the economy. When they see things softening, they kind of stop building, which sometimes hurts us, but they never want to be oversupplied 9 months from now and have all that expense out there and not be able to find buyers. They're very sensitive to it post 2008. And I would say they're way too, they live in a knee-jerk reaction world more than they need to, but they do it, and they can because they can. So so what we're seeing is when we look at resale, you're seeing that actually new listings are up a little bit compared to last year, but solds are actually down more. So it's even actually a little bit worse. But you can see the new listings for new construction are down, which would go in line with what I just said. Solds are up. And that, the new construction on the MLS data is always a little suspect, just because such a small percentage of total new construction is actually showing up on the MLS. But it's things to keep an eye on and look at. This is resale only. So this first section here is looking at August to September of this year. So even the number of properties for sale on September 12th compared to August 12th is up 10%. The new listings are up. Again, you kind of have to take this stuff with a grain of salt. But when we compare it to the same time period last year, you can see numbers are up. Now, this does depend on the day of the week that the 12th happens to fall on, so I don't put a lot of emphasis on this. What I did want to look at on this more than anything is through September 12th, we obviously see inventory up, but we also see new listings still, because remember at the beginning of the year, we had a lot of new listing increase year over year. And so we're still holding on to that, but sales are still only up 1.9%. So again, the year to date data is kind of in line with what we're talking about causing the increased inventory. So we're seeing the sales price compared to average list price kind of stabilize here at 98%. So again, this is the price that they came on the market at before they did any price reductions. And so that can cause this number to be a little bit lower than what the final price compared to the sales or the final list price compared to the sales price. But average days on market was up 1 month compared to last month, or 1 day compared to last month, and up 2 days compared to, actually, I'm sorry, 4 days compared to last August. Again, not super crazy amount of an increase, but definitely something we want to keep an eye on. This is something that's definitely telling. We were up almost 50% in terms of the amount of supply that's on the market. So active inventory, which again, we kind of talked about, it's just a different way to look at it. But remember, a balanced market in real estate is 4 to 6 months of inventory, and we're still only at 1.4 months. And so we're still in, for most sellers, a pretty strong seller's market, but it is less intense and less strong than what we've seen over the last couple of years for most of the time. New construction, again, these numbers, I like to show them, but because we're looking for trends more than anything, but I'm not going to put a ton of stock into it. They're still in a seller's market as well. But definitely, you know, they always carry a little bit more inventory than the resale market. Earlier in the presentation, I talked about the median list price was going down. And I said that we really want to be able to look at also the average sales price. So if we look at the average list price, what we're seeing is that that's definitely coming down. Like, look, in August of last year, the average list price was $477. This year it was $449. Okay. So what's important about that is that obviously sellers, it seems, are getting more realistic. And the reason that I'm going to say that is because if we look at the average sold price, the average sold price was actually up compared to last August. And there was actually a little weird bump in August of last year, which isn't super normal. There might have been a few higher priced properties that sold, but you could see the trend line was definitely going down. And so here, so far this year in the spring, we saw the normal peak around May or June, and actually it was more of a plateau. I'm not sure why that line doesn't look straight. But and then we're seeing really, I would say, a little bit slower drop than normal. And so actually the September number will be very telling for this trend line, again, to show where we're looking at year over year. But what we do see is year to date sold price is up 6% still here in Columbus. When we compare August to August, we only see that up 2.8%. But again, I think the smaller increase in August is due to this little bump that we saw last year, which again, you wouldn't really expect. You would expect more of a normal. You can see like there was a pretty clear trend line here, except for August. So we would expect to see this trend line. And so I expect in Columbus, we will probably end the year. If we see interest rates keep dropping, we could get back up to a 10% increase, I think. But it'll just depend on how much new inventory comes onto the market. Because I think with lowering rates, we could actually see an increase in sellers coming to the market as well as buyers. So it'll be interesting to see that percentage of buyers to sellers entering the market. But certainly as rates decrease, I think we'll see many of those first-time buyers that felt shut out by the higher rates come back into the market, and they're going to have, you know, the most available homes to look at really ever in the last 2 or 3 years. And for, you know, a mid 20 something buyer, maybe ever in that they've ever paid attention to housing, there might be more supply right now. So this is a chart. I keep it in here because I still think it's interesting to look at. And I'm interested to see as we go into an interest rate environment that's falling, if it starts to play out. So far, my hypothesis has not really been as super accurate with it, but I'm seeing it a little bit here. And what we're seeing is this dark green line is the interest rate. So we see this slow downward trend. And what we're seeing is the number of showings is actually starting to increase, which isn't super normal this time of year. Again, we're not going back a full year yet, but you can see looking starting from the first week of October last year, there's a pretty significant downward trend in interest rates. So it'll be interesting to see what happens here over the next couple weeks. And I think this chart probably shows it a little bit better. So this is the number of showings over the last 3 years. And again, this is only in Central Ohio, and this is per showing time. I think we probably have a couple, maybe 1 or 2% of our listings on the market that don't use showing time. But for the most part, I think this is pretty representative. The interesting thing here, you can see Labor Day. The last 2 years, we were obviously had more showings per week in the total market, but you can see that this year, Labor Day actually dropped, or showings actually dropped pre-Labor Day, and then they've actually been going up since Labor Day. And why that's important is we'll see if this trend line continues to stay flat even, you can see how that huge drop off that we saw last year could result in the number of buyers, which I think the number of total showings is a really good way to track how many buyers are actually in the market. You could see how that might happen, which could lead to more sales in the fourth quarter. So it'll be very interesting to see that information. And then last but certainly not least, median rent was up in the month of August by $25, which it had been fairly flat if we look at this. Why that's interesting to me is because I had 2 listings of my own that I was trying to rent that were both in great shape, and it was terrible trying to rent those places out. So many tire kickers. And so I was shocked that we saw this increase. I will say though, over the weekend, we just rented out another place that was in Linden, which I don't own any. I just recently bought actually 2 properties in Linden with an investor partner of mine. And the prices there are like insane compared to what they were a year or 2 ago in terms of rent. So I'm curious if anybody else has any like real-time anecdotal information about this. If you guys have seen rents kind of stalling out in any particular areas and or increasing in any particular areas. But Columbus still overall, I think, is a great market from a rental perspective with increasing population. So that's all I've got. Happy to chat more about rentals. Happy to chat more about interest rates, the Fed, Columbus, national, whatever you guys want to talk about, if anybody has anything else to chat about. So, anybody got anything? I feel like I talked a lot today. I mean, I always talk a lot, but I felt like I talked more than normal. Rentals remain high. Is it the number of available rentals or the prices? Prices. Are you seeing them continuing to increase or just high compared to 3 years ago? high compared to before. Yeah, that's what we're seeing. I mean, just to put it into perspective, these properties that I rented out, we rented them for we did some quick updates and then rented them for $400 more than what I was renting them for before. But they were priced pretty in line with the market. And they weren't renting quickly. So I think if I would have priced them below market, obviously I probably would have rented them quickly, but it feels like the increase in rent has definitely leveled off a little bit. So, anybody else? I just threw my email into the chat for those of you that wanted to email me for the slides. Does anybody have anything else that they want to talk about? Emily, you have anything to share? Chris Shea is who I usually pick on, but he's gone or he's not here today.
Yoga.
Kendra?
No, that was totally an accident. I'm home with a sick toddler, but thank you so much.
All right, sounds good. Well, you guys all have a great week, a great month. And if there's anything that I can do, I'm looking at this stuff all the time. So if you're ever stuck or curious about something, within reason, I can usually get you stuff pretty quickly. So some of you have reached out to me before. So I appreciate you coming. And it looks like we have some people from Miami and Cincinnati and different parts of the country. So I appreciate you guys jumping on as well. And look forward to seeing you next month. Have a great one.